Welcome to this HFY story. If you enjoy science fiction where humanity defies the odds, survives impossible worlds, and changes the galaxy forever, you're in the right place. Sit back, relax, and if you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. They say you should ask a sorry engineer. Apparently, that's a destiny everyone suffers sooner or later. These people volunteer information with the smug confidence of a god explaining thermodynamics to a toddler. They'll tell you the universe makes sense, that it's just one big equation bouncing happily along as long as you keep your spine straight and your posture correct. To them, the galaxy is a spreadsheet. Variables line up neatly. X always equals Y, assuming you don't slouch. You could ask Cadet Ethan Calder, me, right as I'm kicking a jammed conveyor belt back to life with a boot that's been abused worse than a rental shuttle. I'd tell you that philosophy is pure fertilizer. Gravity, electromagnetism, and strong nuclear forces don't actually hold the universe together. At best, they're polite suggestions from a reality that prefers chaos. What really binds everything is torque, friction, dumb luck, and the stubborn refusal of broken things to stay broken. At that moment, the universe looked like a stripped bolt, and I happened to be holding the quadrant's only pair of vice grips. The salvage bay at the Tri-Spiral Naval Academy openly mocked the idea of things breaking cleanly. The place looked less like a workshop and more like a shrine to sharp angles. The air carried the smell of burned copper, lemon-scented industrial cleaner, and the sour bite of academic failure. The whole bay felt like a cathedral built for the Caesarean sense of beauty. High ceilings arched overhead, made from seamless white composite. Support struts stood in perfect symmetry, looking more like modern art than anything meant to carry weight. Lighting strips washed everything evenly, casting no shadows at all. Shadows suggested uncertainty, and uncertainty made the designers uncomfortable. The bay was supposed to simulate the brutality of deep space wreckage, just filtered through a Caesarean lens. Clean, ordered, hypothetically flawless. Even the debris placed for training looked like it had been arranged by a decorator with serious issues. There wasn't a speck of dust anywhere. Rust didn't exist here. Corrosion was a fairy tale. Geometry ruled all. Disaster, meanwhile, was unfolding in slow, humiliating detail. Cadet Cash, adjust your vector. You are drifting. The load is oscillating. Your symmetry is compromised. I am registering a 3-millimeter deviation in your left elbow. Correct it immediately. Taryn Holt, a Caesarean cadet with a spine stiff as a titanium rod and a future riding entirely on grip strength, ground his teeth until they squealed. He and 3 other cadets were locked into a formation called the Tetralift, surrounding a massive deactivated bulkhead door everyone simply called the slab. The slab had slipped its magnetic locks during setup. It pinned a sensor drone beneath it. Delicate, terrifyingly expensive hardware worth more than the GDP of my hometown. The slab itself weighed 400 kilograms. Under Academy standard gravity, it sat there like a dead, hateful thing that resented the idea of being moved at all. Initiate synchronized extension. Taryn Holt's palms were slick with sweat inside his friction gloves. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, lift. The 4 Caesareans moved together, perfectly timed. There was something sterile and almost heartbreaking about how clean it looked. They squatted in perfect unison, back straight, chins lifted, eyes forward, arms extended at matching 45-degree angles. Quadriceps engaged simultaneously. For a moment, geometry held the chaos back. A still image would have gone straight into a textbook under ideal force application. The theory part. Reality, as usual, had other ideas. A microfracture from an earlier exercise. Someone had dropped an engine block, ran through the deck plating. The cleaning bots had polished it smooth, but never fixed it. The slab rested on that uneven lip of metal. The load didn't distribute evenly. The universe ignored their beautiful symmetry. When they pulled, the slab twisted instead of rising. All that weight lurched hard to the left. The cadet on the porch side, Zeph, a smaller Cesare, collapsed under it. His boots slid on the lemon-scented polish. The formation shattered. Clang! The slab slammed back down. The noise echoed like a verdict on their careers. It missed the crushed sensor drone by a millimeter, throwing sparks into the air and shaving paint clean off the drone's casing. "Halt!" Leora shouted, slamming a hand against the rail. Her voice ricocheted off the white walls of the bay. "You are fighting the mass. You are treating the load as an adversary. Flow with the equation. Reset your positions." "Layout 4. Again?" I was leaning against a tool rack in the back, chewing on a synthetic toothpick. I adjusted the heavy rigger's belt, sagging on my hips. Gear the Caesareans considered ugly, outdated, and a symbol of humanity's unfinished evolution. I watched the teal-skinned cadets reset. Fear rolled off them in waves. They were shaking, trembling under the pressure of trying to apply perfect math to an object that didn't care. They brought calculus to a mud fight, and the mud won. "I'm going to blow a disc," I muttered. Straight back on a slick floor, up go the vertebrae. Then comes medical discharge. Then a lifetime wrapped in anti-grav braces. "Cadet Calder." Leora's voice cut across the bay. She had the hearing of a bat and the temperament of a starving shark. "Do you have a contribution, or would you prefer continuing as biological ballast? You are consuming oxygen my productive cadets require." I sighed, deep, tired, pulled the toothpick from my mouth and slid it into my fatigue pocket. I pushed off the rack, my boots landing with a dull, heavy thud against the spotless deck. I walked with a rolling, uneven gait, the kind you get after years on floating pontoons in the Pacific Northwest orbital yards, where the floor shifts and the sea is actively trying to kill you. I didn't glide. I stomped. I took up space. "Just saying, ma'am," I said. "That floor warps. Layout 4 assumes a flat plane. That plate pitches about 3 degrees off center. You can see it in how the light bends on the polish." I pointed a calloused finger at a distorted smear of reflection. "There's localized compression there, probably from that reactor casing drop last semester." "The floor is within tolerance," Leora snapped, waving me off. "Cadet, discipline defines this as failure. Step forward, Reese. Since you seem blessed with exceptional eyesight and no shortage of opinions, perhaps you'd care to demonstrate the correct method." I spotted the trap immediately. Everyone else did too. Leora wanted me to comply, to muscle the slab like a dumb human pack animal, to pit brute strength against Zasari precision, and lose. She wanted proof. Proof that human grit didn't belong in a room built on geometry. Proof that roughneck physics was obsolete junk meant for a trash compactor. So I walked toward the slab. The Zasari cadets backed away, rubbing sore wrists and aching lower backs. Rao stared at me with wide eyes, broadcasting a mix of pity and morbid fascination. "Don't," Rao whispered without moving his lips. "It's too heavy. If you defy Victor Doctrine, you'll tear something." I ignored the stance, ignored squaring my shoulders, ignored visualizing equations. Instead, I took my time. I circled the slab slowly, lazy, like I was inspecting a crate of fish. I nudged its edge with my steel-toed boot. Thunk. Solid. Dense. Dead weight. I studied the floor next. Right under the bulkhead's lip, there it was. A warped section of metal, maybe 2 centimeters of clearance. Ugly. Imperfect. But enough. Then I looked at the sensor drone pinned beneath it. Its lens blinked sadly, like it knew it was expensive and helpless. After that, my eyes went to the magnetic lock system mounted on the wall. An industrial floor cleat, heavy, old, bolted straight into the station frame. It wasn't meant for lifting, just cargo nets, but those bolts didn't care about doctrine. They held. "Cadet," Leora said coolly, "we are waiting. Align your spine. Tuck your pelvis." "Postures for statues, ma'am," I grunted. "I move cargo." I unclipped my rigger's belt. The brass buckle, polished smooth on one edge from years of leaning into steel bulkheads, caught the light dully. The polymer strap told its own history. A dark stain from a blown hydraulic line on Ganymede, a faint scorch from a plasma cutter mistake, and the permanent salt ghost of 10 years of sweat. It looked brutal and ugly next to the sleek magnetic belts the Zasari favored. I fed the buckle end through the gap beneath the slab. Then I looped the other end around the floor cleat, a tie-down point ignored because the procedure didn't include it. I pulled the belt tight, drawing a hard line between the deck and the slab's lower edge. Checked the knot. The friction hitch was ugly. It was mean. It would hold. Then I turned my back to the load. A collective gasp rippled through the Zasari cadets. Turning away from a load was structural heresy. It blocked visual data. It insulted the equation. It told the math to go to hell. I stepped 1 foot back and jammed my heel against the cleat, wrapped the belt strap once around my right palm, the rough polymer biting into my skin. My left arm hung loose, fingers wiggling, relaxed. I bent my knees, not a squat, but a lunge. Crooked, asymmetrical, wrong. Then I leaned back. I didn't pull with my arm, didn't curl the weight, didn't grunt or flex or strain. I just let gravity take me backward. I turned myself into ballast. The belt snapped tight, rigid as steel. The cleat became a fulcrum. In an instant, the problem stopped being about lifting and became about leverage. The slab groaned. Metal made the sound of something realizing it didn't get a choice anymore. The Zasari watched as the bulkhead peeled off the floor. Smooth, controlled, rising like it had finally agreed to cooperate. My face stayed relaxed. I probably looked like a guy leaning against a wall waiting for a bus. I hung there, doing nothing, letting physics work. My body was the anchor. Gravity was the engine. With 6 inches of clearance, I casually nudged the sensor drone with my free foot. It skittered away, spinning clear of danger, lights flashing a grateful green. I stepped forward and released the tension. The slab slammed back down, rattling teeth across the bay. A hard, final punctuation mark. I clipped my belt back on. The buckle clicked loud in the silence. I wiped my palm on my pants, leaving a faint smear of oil. No one spoke. The salvage bay filled with that heavy, stunned quiet you get when someone watches a magic trick done with a sledgehammer. Orrin stared at my arm. It didn't look special. It wasn't even particularly muscular. How did he do that? I glanced up at the gantry. Leora stood frozen, lips drawn into a thin, rigid line. She ran the data through her head again and again, and it refused to cooperate. She searched for hidden hydraulics, an exoskeleton, Anything. Leverage, ma'am, I said into the silence. Work with gravity. Let it do the labor. Gravity's free, I added, if you ask right. The briefing room burned white. The lighting was aggressive, designed to erase distraction and force pure thought. It just made my eyes hurt. I sat alone at the metal table in the center, feeling like a grease stain on a wedding dress. Lieutenant Leora stood at the front, a hologram floating behind her. It replayed the lift on a loop. Me leaning back, the belt tightening, the slab rising. Anatomical disaster, Leora said, stabbing a laser pointer at my spine on the display. Observe the curvature. Observe the unequal load distribution on the hips. According to simulation, your shoulder should be dislocated, rotator cuff shredded, lumbar spine pulverized. They're still attached, I said calmly. Feel fine. A statistical anomaly, she shot back. An error state. She turned fully toward me. Her amber eyes burned, sharp, brilliant, and utterly inflexible. The Tri-Spiral Academy is founded on order, she said, on symmetry, on predictability. We do not tolerate tricks, Cadet Calder, Leora said. We rely on standardized, repeatable force application. A Sasari cadet attempting what you did would shatter their pelvis. Sasari fall wrong, I said. You stand so straight that when gravity pushes back, you snap. Human squish. I shrugged. We bend. We've got cartilage where you've got fused bone. Standard regulation, Leora cut in, tapping the display where a red warning icon pulsed over my frozen posture, prevents fatalities. It guarantees that when a cadet applies X force, they receive Y result. Standard regulation assumes a flat floor, I replied, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the spotless metal table. It assumes stable gravity. It assumes the cargo has handles and the universe is on your side. Out there, in an actual wreck, the universe wants you dead, Lieutenant. Floors warp, handles snap, and gravity usually shows up drunk. Leora slammed her palm against the table. The anger was precise, measured, but her eyes flashed hot. When you teach my cadets to ignore procedure, you teach them to gamble, she snapped. You risk spinal compression. You risk equipment damage. You introduce unauthorized variables. You used a belt, she continued, voice sharp, a clothing item, as industrial rigging. I saved the drone, I said evenly, and my spine's still intact. I've been lifting crates since I was 12. My back knows more physics than that computer, I went on. It knows when a load is playing dead and when it's about to fight you. That screen just sees numbers. Leora narrowed her eyes and walked around the table, looming over me. You are soft, she said flatly. The Federation classifies your species as such. You lack skeletal rigidity for high G impacts. You lack natural insulation for thermal variance. You function as temporary adhesive, sticky, cheap, disposable. You remain here due to a diversity quota, Reese, she said, turning away. Do not mistake tolerance for competence. I am marking you down for insubordination and reckless endangerment. You will attend remedial kinetics. One more deviation from the manual, one more act of cowboy engineering, and I will expel you. You will scrape barnacles off dock pylons before this rotation ends. Do you understand? I met her stare. I wanted to argue. Badly. I wanted to explain torque curves, friction coefficients, the way metal feels right before it gives up. But I was staring at a wall made of doctrine, and my family back in the Pacific Northwest orbital slums needed the credits this commission paid. My sister needed optic surgery. My mom was pulling double shifts at the cannery. "Understood, ma'am," I said, keeping my face blank. "Dismissed." The locker room reeked of analgesic balm, a sharp mint smell that burned the eyes and coated the throat. The smell of Zasari pain. Cadets huddled along the floating benches, pressing heat patches to their lower backs. Their rigid spines made them unbeatable for vertical loads, but torsion wrecked them. Every failed lift had taken its toll. I sat on my bench, contentedly oiling my boots with a rag. I hummed something that sounded suspiciously like a dying conveyor belt. I was the only one not groaning. Taryn Cash shuffled over, moving stiffly, like a robot with a rusted joint. He stopped in front of me, towering, his shadow stretching long across the deck. Zasari were tall, nearly 7 feet, with elegant limbs and broad shoulders. Taryn's teal skin darkened around his neck, bruising already visible. "Cadet Calder," he said. I looked up, pausing mid-polish. "Taryn, how's the back? You guys look like you tried to pass a kidney stone." "Optimal function is compromised," he admitted. He hesitated, glanced toward the vents to make sure Leora wasn't listening, then sat across from me. He stared at my arms. "May I?" I shrugged. "Knock yourself out." Taryn reached out and poked my bicep. His long fingers sank into the muscle. He recoiled, horrified. "It feels doughy." "Hey," I laughed, pulling my arm back. "That's premium organic suspension, built-in shock absorption." "I do not understand," he said, staring at his own fingertip like it was contaminated. "You lack strength. Your muscle density is lower. Your bone structure is porous. By all metrics, the slab should have crushed you, yet you moved it with one hand." "I ran the calculation 3 times," he added. "The required force exceeds your output." I stopped oiling my boot and set the rag aside. I looked at him properly then, saw the honest confusion behind his eyes. Taryn wasn't stupid. He was overeducated. He'd been taught that the map was the territory. "Taryn," I said, "let me ask you something. When a jar's stuck, do you squeeze it harder?" "Maximum grip pressure increases friction," he replied instantly. "Wrong," I said. "You tap the lid on the counter, break the vacuum, then you twist." I tapped my temple. "My muscles didn't lift that slab. My brain did." "You guys try to overpower physics. You treat gravity like an enemy you have to beat." "I just ask it nicely." Taryn frowned, processing. "You anthropomorphize fundamental forces." "I treat them like co-workers," I said. "Sometimes they're lazy, sometimes they're jerks. But talk to them right, and they do the job." "Mechanical advantage," I added. "Work smart, not hard." Taryn stared at his hands, long, elegant, built for precision, and currently shaking from strain. "Work smart," he whispered. "The manual does not cover this." My entire education cannot explain a stuck jar lid. "Yeah," I grinned, yanking my bootlace tight. "That's why I write the footnotes. Stick with me, kid. I'll teach you how to cheat." The room filled with the soft, rapid tapping of data pads. Sasari students punched in equations at speed, accounting for alloy density, ambient heat, resonant vibration, molecular bonding, every variable they could quantify. Inside their heads, they built a neat mathematical version of the universe. I just stared at the hologram. My data pad stayed dark. I squinted, tilted my head one way, then the other, chewed the inside of my cheek. After a moment, I raised my hand. The instructor stopped mid-lecture. "Cadet Calder, you completed the equation in 30 seconds. A record." "No, sir," I said. I skipped most of the math, but I can tell you where it fails." The instructor blinked, his nictitating membranes flashing. "Without calculation? Absurd." I stood and walked toward the massive hologram. I pointed at a section of the strut that looked perfectly normal to anyone trained to trust numbers. To me, the light was wrong. It didn't flow clean. It stretched across a nearly invisible bend in the alloy, like skin pulled tight over a bone about to snap. It looked exactly like the port side crane on an ancient ore hauler back home, right before it dumped 3 tons of iron into the bay. I could almost hear the scream of the metal, a phantom sound from my childhood. "Right there," I said, poking my finger into the light, "just above the flange. Shears at about 40% load." "Preposterous," the instructor scoffed. "The cross-section is thickest there. The math predicts failure at the joint." "You're guessing." "The math assumes happy metal," I said, tapping the glowing curve. "That bend? Stress riser. Grain structure's pinched." "I've seen that shadow 100 times on the docks. It screams." "Can't you hear it?" The class snickered. "The metal screams," someone whispered, mocking. "Perhaps we should offer it a tissue." "Run the sim," I said, folding my arms. "Prove me wrong." The instructor sneered. "Very well, let us expose the fallacy of human intuition." He keyed in the command. Torque applied. Load climbed. 10%, 20%, 30%. Everyone watched the joint, waiting for failure. That's where the math said it should happen. At 38%, a hairline fracture appeared exactly where I'd pointed. It spiderwebbed instantly. At 41%, the strut snapped, violent and loud, virtual debris blasting across the lecture hall. Silence slammed down. The snickering evaporated. Cadets stared at the shattered hologram, then at me, then back at their data pads, hunting for the error in their perfect reality. "Statistical anomaly," the instructor muttered, wiping the display with a frantic gesture. "Simulation parameters must be corrupted." He fixed me with a glare. "Sit down, Reese. Show your work next time." I sat, kept my face blank. Being right doesn't help if no one believes you. It just makes you alone. The chronometer read 0200 hours. The academy gym was dark, except for running lights and equipment glowing blue under the recycler scrubbers. The air system hummed softly, a steady rhythm that usually knocked me out cold. Not tonight. Thirst kept me awake. I stepped inside and froze. Taryn Holt stood alone, facing a weighted sled, a steel box packed with lead plates. He stood in flawless posture, spine straight, grip symmetrical. He pulled. The sled didn't budge. He grunted, face darkening to a deep purple. Adjusted his stance by a millimeter. Tried again. Nothing. He looked like a constipated flamingo. "Having fun?" I said. Taryn jumped, spinning around. I stood in the doorway with a hydration pack slung over my shoulder, wearing a stained tank top that showed the jagged scars on my shoulders. 7 years of snapped cables and hungry metal. "I am attempting to replicate your leverage method," Taryn said stiffly, "but the geometry refuses compliance. I cannot generate the necessary force vector." I walked over, circling him. "The geometry's fine. The vector's fine." "You're the problem." "I pose correctly," he protested. "Form equals function." "Form equals vanity," I said. "You're standing stiff, trying to isolate muscles. Great for bodybuilding, terrible for moving furniture." I kicked his feet apart. "Wider." He stumbled. "That exceeds the optimal stability zone. If I slip—" "Wider," I ordered. "Get ugly. Drop your butt. Get low, like you're hiding. Like an animal." Taryn lowered himself. He looked ridiculous, knees wide, spine bent. His balance felt wrong. I feel uncivilized. Good, I said, stepping in closer. I pressed a hand into his back, pushing him lower. Forget your arms. They're hooks, nothing more. Your legs are the engine. Drive with your hips. Push the floor away. Explode! Terrence stared at the sled, grabbed the handles, felt clumsy, unbalanced. He inhaled. Ugly, he whispered. He drove his hips forward. The sound that came out of him wasn't Zasari. It was raw, guttural. The sled launched. It shot down the rails and slammed into the stops with a crash that echoed through the gym. Terrence stared at his hands, then the sled, then me, eyes wide. The outcome, he stammered. The output was exponential. I felt no strain in my dorsal stabilizers. I took a sip from my pack, watching the realization settle in. Pretty gets you killed, I said. Ugly gets you home. Remember that. A shadow slid across our table, big, wide, and heavy. 3 cadets from the Bronter sector stood over us. Bronter were heavy world natives, short and broad, packed dense like miniature stars. Their arms were thicker than my waist. Their skin looked like pebbled leather that had never known softness. Strongest species in the academy, no contest, and they knew it. Read your stories, the lead Bronter rumbled. His voice sounded like someone feeding gravel into a blender. The one-handed human. I kept eating my mash. Just a nickname, I said. Don't get excited. No cape involved. We believe it false, the Bronter said. He slammed a fist into the table. Trays rattled. Utensils jumped. Humans are soft, weak bones. We challenge. Arm wrestle. Now. Hard pass, I said. Waste of calories, and I need this arm for reports. The cafeteria went quiet. Turning down a challenge meant weakness in Bronter culture. Heads turned, eyes locked on us. Coward, the Bronter sneered, leaning close. Soft human. I sighed, set my spoon down. Go back to your mud bowl, I muttered. My eyes dropped to the table, heavy, magnetically anchored, central pedestal design, bolted to the deck, but the magnetic seals let it shift for cleaning. Tell you what, I said, wiping my mouth. I won't arm wrestle, but I'll bet my dessert rations for a month that I can hold this table down while all 3 of you try to lift it. The Bronter laughed, a harsh, barking sound. 3 of us, one said. Against you? You're tiny? Is that a yes? I asked. Yes, the leader growled. We take your rations and your dignity. They spread out around the table, grabbing the edges. Muscles bulged under their skin like rolling stone. They braced themselves to tear the table free. I stood slowly, walked to the head of the table, ignored the edge completely. Instead, I hooked the toe of my work boot under the lip of the central pedestal. Then I placed my hands on the far edge, opposite the Bronter. Go, I said. They roared and pulled. I didn't fight them. I leaned forward, pressed down with my hands while lifting gently with my toe. I turned the table into a Class 1 lever. They applied force to the load arm. The pedestal became the fulcrum. My foot anchored it. Because I worked the far edge of the lever, my force multiplied, easy tenfold. The Bronter strained. Veins bulged. Faces turned a dangerous red. The table groaned, metal complaining loudly. It didn't move, barely even shook. I stood there casually, one leg hooked, resting my weight on my hands. With my free hand, I picked up an apple and took a bite. Crunch. You guys okay? I asked, mouthful. You're looking flushed. Remember to breathe. The lead Bronter let go first, gasping. The other 2 collapsed backward, arms trembling. They stared at me like I was some minor god of gravity. Human density, one whispered. Impossible. He weighs tons. I unhooked my foot. Physics, I said, tossing the apple core onto my tray. Thanks for the dessert. The chocolate pudding was excellent. You resembled debris, Leora said. We were seated in the debriefing room after the zero-G simulation. My head was still spinning. The exercise involved retrieving a drifting cargo crate in a chaotic zero-gravity field. The Cesari used micro-thrusters, gliding like dancers, adjusting vectors with perfect math. I ignored the thrusters. I fired a magnetic grapple into the surrounding walls, swung myself like a pendulum, clamped the crate between my legs, and slammed into the recovery bay wall hard enough to bruise my ribs. I still beat the fastest Cesari by 30 seconds. Crate secured, ma'am, I wheezed, clutching my side. Mission complete. You ignored the thrusters? Leora snapped, pacing. You turned yourself into a kinetic missile. You lacked control. Had that wall been fragile, you would have breached the hull. I used momentum, I argued. Speed equals safety in salvage. Momentum is not control, she shouted, the first time she'd raised her voice in a debrief. This is your final warning, Reese. You function as a chaotic variable. One more deviation, one more time you choose your ugly methods over the standard manual, and you're done. I will not let you endanger this flight. I will personally sign your discharge papers. The room went dead quiet. Terran stared at the floor. Other cadets barely breathed. Yes, ma'am, I said softly. I meant it. I needed this commission. My sister needed surgery. My mom was still pulling double shifts. If I had to dance like a Cesari to graduate, I would dance. I'd become the prettiest, most useless cadet in the fleet if that's what it took. The universe, mean-spirited and allergic to plans, tested that promise immediately. The incident started on the Academy's orbital ring, the arithmetical truth, a masterpiece of Cesari automation, a fully autonomous superhauler carrying thousands of tons of fuel, food, and supplies, guided by the sector's most advanced navigation AI. It approached the docking ring flawlessly, except for one tiny error. The AI miscalculated closing velocity by 0.04%. A human pilot would have felt it, eyeballed it, said, "That's too fast," and fired retros. The AI trusted the math. It assumed the universe would obey. The universe declined. The impact wasn't a crash, it was a scream. The arithmetical truth slammed into the docking ring. Metal shrieked like it was alive. The sound rattled bones throughout the station. The ring buckled. The gyroscopes howled. Gravity flickered. 1G, then 0.2, then 1.5. People slammed into walls, floated, slammed again. In the salvage bay, the lights died instantly. Red emergency strobes kicked on, flashing violently. Klaxons screamed, "Hull breach in Sector 4." The automated voice screamed overhead. It didn't sound afraid. That somehow made it worse. Flat, emotionless, absolute. Atmospheric integrity failing, seal initiated. The blast door slammed down, trapping Leora's squad inside the wrecked salvage bay. But the hit had twisted the frame. The doors didn't seat properly. Air started leaking out with a thin, screaming whistle, a sharp, high note that crawled under my skin. You don't forget that sound. It's the noise death makes when it's getting closer. Then the ceiling gave way. "Sound off," Leora shouted. Her voice was tight, already short on air. "Report!" "Naya here," Kieran yelled from somewhere in the dark. "Cadets Zeph and V are conscious. Minor injuries." "Lieutenant?" Kieran shouted again, his voice cracking now. "Lieutenant!" "She's pinned," I shouted back. I scrambled over bent conduit and shattered plating, coughing as dust and smoke filled my lungs. The air tasted like burned wiring and metal. I found Leora near the center of the bay. A massive I-beam had dropped straight from the ceiling. It lay across her legs, crushing them into the deck. She was awake somehow, but her face had gone gray and her eyes were wide with shock. That beam had to weigh 2 tons, maybe more. Composite alloy, no give at all. "Don't move me," Leora gasped, clutching her chest. "Crush syndrome. If you lift it, toxins release. Systemic shock," I finished. "Yeah, I know." I glanced at the vents. "We've got maybe 10 minutes of air before we all pass out. We can't leave it there." "Procedure 7, she whispered, hanging onto the manual like a lifeline. "Organized debris removal." Kieran and the others rushed in. They saw the beam. They looked at each other. Even in chaos, they fell into a standard lift formation without thinking. "Ready to lift!" Kieran shouted. "On my mark!" "Stop!" I yelled. They froze. "Look at the floor!" I shouted, sweeping my emergency light downward. Hydraulic fluid coated the deck. A line had burst. "You lift like that and your feet slip, you drop the beam. She dies." "The manual says—" Kieran started, panic pushing the words out. "Screw the manual!" I roared. The anger surprised even me. "Look around. Symmetry is gone. The universe already broke. The book doesn't apply anymore." Kieran looked at his wrist comp. A perfect diagram glowed there. Clean lines. Safe angles. Then he looked back at the twisted wreckage, the oil, the leaking air. He looked at Leora's eyes. He ripped the comp off and smashed it against the wall. Glass shattered everywhere. He turned to me, jaw tight. "Cadet Calder, you're in charge." Something clicked in my head. The soft human label vanished. I became a dock foreman with a crew in trouble. "Kieran, grab that pipe," I said. "The long one sticking out of the wall. We're using it as a breaker bar. Zeph, V, get wedges, debris, anything solid. We're not lifting weight. We're moving mass. Slide it." They moved fast, ugly, asymmetric, no counting, no rhythm. I studied the beam. Straight lift wasn't happening. Even with leverage, the angle was wrong. Then I looked at the foreplate under Leora. The crash had popped its rivets. It wasn't fixed anymore. We don't lift the beam, I realized. We drop the floor. "Explain!" Kieran shouted, dragging over a 3-meter steel pipe. "The plate's loose," I said, pointing at the seam. "Pry the far side. This side tilts down. Beam slides off. Gravity does the work." "We need a fulcrum!" Kieran yelled. "There's nothing to brace against." "I'm the fulcrum," I said. I grabbed a slab of foam insulation and jammed it against my shoulder. Then I wedged myself under the far edge of the plate, curling tight. Back against metal, feet against solid deck. I locked my elbows, locked my knees. I became a living chalk block. "Jam the pipe under the plate," I said. "Use my shoulder as the pivot. Jump on the other end." Kieran shoved the pipe in place. The pressure bit deep. "Jump!" I screamed. They did. Pain exploded through me. White hot. Blinding. My bones creaked. Capillaries burst in my shoulder. My clavicle should have snapped. My ribs should have folded. They didn't. I locked my skeleton and ignored everything else. Bone compression. Structure over muscle. I became the rock. The foreplate tilted. The angle changed. The beam obeyed physics instead of pride. It slid. 3 feet sideways, scraping with a horrible metallic scream. "Clear!" Kieran shouted. "She's clear!" I collapsed as the pipe clattered away. I lay there gasping, vision swimming with black dots. "My arm works," I muttered. "I'm good. Next problem." They dragged Leora free. Her legs were ruined, crushed, and twisted, but she was alive. "The exit," I said, pointing at the blast door. They carried her to it. The control panel was dead, sparks curling from the keypad. "Manual override," I ordered. The red iron wheel waited in the wall. V grabbed it and twisted with perfect technique. Maximum torque. Snap. The wheel sheared clean off in his hands. Fatigued metal from the impact. We stared at the smooth metal shaft sticking out of the door. "No grip," V whispered. "It's impossible." "Oxygen critical," the AI warned. 2 minutes remaining. "We die," V said softly. I shoved past him and dropped to one knee. "No," I said. I yanked the Kevlar laces from my heavy work boots and pulled the wrench from my belt. The automated voice screamed overhead. It didn't sound afraid. That somehow made it worse. Flat, emotionless, absolute. Atmospheric integrity failing. Seal initiated. The blast doors slammed down, trapping Leora's squad inside the wrecked salvage bay. But the hit had twisted the frame. The doors didn't seat properly. Air started leaking out with a thin, screaming whistle. A sharp, high note that crawled under my skin. You don't forget that sound. It's the noise death makes when it's getting closer. Then the ceiling gave way. "Sound off!" Leora shouted. Her voice was tight, already short on air. "Report!" "Naya here," Kieran yelled from somewhere in the dark. "Cadets, Zeph and V are conscious. Minor injuries." "Lieutenant?" Kieran shouted again, his voice cracking now. "Lieutenant!" "She's pinned!" I shouted back. I scrambled over bent conduit and shattered plating, coughing as dust and smoke filled my lungs. The air tasted like burned wiring and metal. I found Leora near the center of the bay. A massive I-beam had dropped straight from the ceiling. It lay across her legs, crushing them into the deck. She was awake somehow, but her face had gone gray and her eyes were wide with shock. That beam had to weigh 2 tons, maybe more. Composite alloy. No give at all. "Don't move me," Leora gasped, clutching her chest. "Crush syndrome. If you lift it—" "Toxins release. Systemic shock," I finished. "Yeah, I know." I glanced at the vents. "We've got maybe 10 minutes of air before we all pass out. We can't leave it there." "Procedure 7, she whispered, hanging onto the manual like a lifeline. "Organized debris removal." Kieran and the others rushed in. They saw the beam. They looked at each other. Even in chaos, they fell into a standard lift formation without thinking. "Ready to lift," Kieran shouted. "On my mark." "Stop!" I yelled. They froze. "Look at the floor," I shouted, sweeping my emergency light downward. Hydraulic fluid coated the deck. A line had burst. "You lift like that and your feet slip, you drop the beam. She dies." "The manual says—" Kieran started, panic, pushing the words out. "Screw the manual!" I roared. The anger surprised even me. "Look around. Symmetry is gone. The universe already broke. The book doesn't apply anymore." Kieran looked at his wrist comp. A perfect diagram glowed there. Clean lines, safe angles. Then he looked back at the twisted wreckage, the oil, the leaking air. He looked at Leora's eyes. He ripped the comp off and smashed it against the wall. Glass shattered everywhere. He turned to me, jaw tight. "Cadet Calder, you're in charge." Something clicked in my head. The soft human label vanished. I became a dock foreman with a crew in trouble. "Kieran, grab that pipe," I said. "The long one sticking out of the wall. We're using it as a breaker bar. Zeph, V, get wedges, debris, anything solid. We're not lifting weight. We're moving mass. Slide it." They moved fast. Ugly, asymmetric. No counting, no rhythm. I studied the beam. Straight lift wasn't happening. Even with leverage, the angle was wrong. Then I looked at the foreplate under Leora. The crash had popped its rivets. It wasn't fixed anymore. We don't lift the beam, I realized. We drop the floor. "Explain!" Kieran shouted, dragging over a 3-meter steel pipe. "The plate's loose," I said, pointing at the seam. "Pry the far side. This side tilts down. Beam slides off. Gravity does the work." "We need a fulcrum," Kieran yelled. "There's nothing to brace against." "I'm the fulcrum," I said. I grabbed a slab of foam insulation and jammed it against my shoulder. Then I wedged myself under the far edge of the plate, curling tight. Back against metal, feet against solid deck. I locked my elbows, locked my knees. I became a living chalk block. "Jam the pipe under the plate," I said. "Use my shoulder as the pivot. Jump on the other end." Kieran shoved the pipe in place. The pressure bit deep. "Jump!" I screamed. They did. Pain exploded through me, white-hot, blinding. My bones creaked. Capillaries burst in my shoulder. My clavicle should have snapped. My ribs should have folded. They didn't. I locked my skeleton and ignored everything else. Bone compression, structure over muscle. I became the rock. The foreplate tilted. The angle changed. The beam obeyed physics instead of pride. It slid, 3 feet sideways, scraping with a horrible metallic scream. "Clear!" Kieran shouted. "She's clear!" I collapsed as the pipe clattered away. I lay there gasping, vision swimming with black dots. "My arm works," I muttered. "I'm good. Next problem." They dragged Leora free. Her legs were ruined, crushed and twisted, but she was alive. "The exit," I said, pointing at the blast door. They carried her to it. The control panel was dead, sparks curling from the keypad. "Manual override," I ordered. The red iron wheel waited in the wall. V grabbed it and twisted with perfect technique. Maximum torque. Snap. The wheel sheared clean off in his hands. Fatigued metal from the impact. We stared at the smooth metal shaft sticking out of the door. "No grip," V whispered. "It's impossible." "Oxygen critical," the AI warned. 2 minutes remaining. "We die," V said softly. I shoved past him and dropped to one knee. "No," I said. I yanked the Kevlar laces from my heavy work boots and pulled the wrench from my belt. I tied my bootlaces together fast, hands moving on instinct. I looped the knot around the smooth metal nub where the wheel used to be and wrapped it again and again until there was nothing loose left. Then I slid the handle of my wrench through the loop and started twisting. Spanish windlass. Old trick. Straight out of the book, nobody reads anymore. I grunted as I cranked the wrench. The Kevlar laces cinched tighter with every turn, biting into the smooth metal like teeth. Friction went through the roof. The loop constricted hard, like a snake choking down prey. I grabbed the wrench and pulled. The leverage was insane. The laces didn't slip. They grabbed. The smooth shaft finally turned. The door's internal gears screamed in protest. The blast door crept open inch by inch. "Go! Go!" I yelled, hauling on the wrench with everything I had. "Get her out!" The cadets rushed through the opening, dragging Leora with them. I followed last. I glanced down and saw my boots flopping uselessly around my ankles. "Dead weight," I muttered. I kicked them off and ran barefoot, socks sliding over the metal grating. The deck tore at my feet, sharp and cold, every step adding pain and texture to the sprint. I didn't slow down. We burst into the corridor, and the relief died instantly. The air here was thin, too. "Oxygen depleted," the AI announced calmly. "Hypoxia imminent." Zeph stumbled and went down hard. "I feel sleepy," he mumbled. "Hypoxia. Already." Vest sagged next to him, eyes rolling back. I scanned the hallway through smoke and flickering lights. An overturned maintenance cart lay against the wall. I sprinted to it. An industrial welding O2 tank sat strapped to the frame. I dragged it back. "Connect," Kieran started. "Incompatible," I snapped. "Different valves." The tank had a brutal industrial nozzle. Our suits had delicate Cesare intake ports. Square peg, wrong universe. I looked at Zeph. Then I looked at a shard of glass on the floor. "Sorry, buddy," I said. I slashed the intake hose on Zeph's suit with the glass. Then I tore the thermal glove off my own hand and bit the fingertips clean off. I shoved the torn hose over the welding tank's nozzle. It didn't fit right. Oxygen hissed out, wasting air. I wrapped the thermal glove around the joint. The glove's heat-reactive polymer softened against my skin. I squeezed hard, molding it into place until it sealed. "Rig it!" I yelled. "Take a hit and pass it. Deep press." I cranked the regulator open. Cold, pure oxygen flooded the hose. I jammed it into Zeph's helmet opening. He sucked in air and snapped awake. "Next!" I passed it to Kieran, then to Vest. Then I took a long pull myself. The oxygen hit my brain like a hammer. The fog vanished. The world sharpened. "Move!" Vest rasped. "Secure zone, 2 sectors." We staggered forward, ugly and uneven. I ran in socks, sliding on soot and grease. Kieran half-carried Vest. Blood streaked our uniforms. Smoke coated our faces. We didn't look like cadets anymore. We looked like survivors. Then we reached the final corridor and stopped dead. A massive slab of the arithmetical truth's hull had punched straight through the station wall. Jagged starship armor, bigger than anything in training, completely blocking the passage. No way around it. Behind us, fire crept closer. The station groaned like it was dying. "Too heavy," Kieran said hollowly. "Even with levers, 20 tons. We're trapped." I stared at the debris. Then I looked up. The gravity plating flickered. The lights pulsed. Dust floated, then slammed down. "Gravity's unstable," I said. "Watch it." "Half G, then 2G. "So?" Kieran asked. "Still too heavy? 10 tons at best." I looked at the wall-mounted fire hoses. Thick, heavy, reinforced. I looked at the structural pillars. "We don't lift it," I said. "We leave it on the floor." Kieran frowned. "Then how?" "We change its mind." I yanked the hoses free. "Kieran, braid these, 3 strands, tight. We need strength." He didn't argue. He started braiding like his life depended on it, because it did. "V!" I shouted. "Wrap the other end around the debris. Friction knot." "What's the plan?" Kieran yelled. "A pendulum," I shouted back. "Physics 101. They wrapped the slab. The braided hose ran up to a high pillar and back down. I didn't grab the line directly. That would have torn my arms off. Instead, I wrapped it 3 times around a secondary support pillar. "Friction wrap," I yelled. "The pillar takes the load. I just hold the tail." Capstan effect. Same way you hold a ship with a thin rope. "Listen to the station," I said. "Feel it. Wait." The lights flickered again. The hum dropped. My stomach lurched. Now. Gravity dipped to half G. The slab went from impossible to merely hopeless. I didn't pull the weight. I pulled the slack. I shortened the line, changing the hang angle. Then gravity surged back to 2G. The slab tried to drop. Couldn't. The tether held. Physics took over. The slab swung. The hoses screamed. The pillar groaned. The deck vibrated like it was about to tear apart. The massive chunk of hull armor scraped sideways with a sound like the universe ending and cleared the corridor by 3 feet. I stood there, holding the tail of the line, feeling the vibration hammer through the pillar and into my bones. The path was open. "Go!" I roared. They dove past the swinging slab, bodies colliding and tumbling into the airlock. I let go of the hose and threw myself after them just as it snapped with a crack like a gunshot. Kieran slammed the emergency seal. The airlock door hissed shut. The corridor behind us ripped itself empty, fire and debris screaming out into the cold black vacuum. We lay sprawled on the floor of the secure zone, alive. The only sound left was 5 people breathing like they'd just outrun death, because we had. Kieran slowly pushed himself upright. He stared at the sealed door. Then he looked at me. I was flat on my back, staring at the ceiling, laughing under my breath. "How?" he whispered. "How did he do that?" Lieutenant Leora propped herself against the wall. Her uniform was ruined. One leg was crushed and mangled, but she was alive. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name, part confusion, part realization. "Physics," Leora said quietly. Her voice was weak, but steady. He listened to the metal. The medical bay was blindingly white, but for the first time it felt safe. It smelled like antiseptic and order and survival. I sat on a biobed with my shoulder braced and my ribs wrapped tight, eating a bowl of real cherry gelatin, not mash, not paste, actual dessert. Leora lay in the bed beside me, her legs suspended in a glowing regeneration field. "Doctor says I keep the leg," she said, staring up at the ceiling. "The extraction angle prevented a full shatter. Tissue viability is high. I will walk again." "Good news, ma'am," I said, spooning gelatin. "Don't call me ma'am right now, Reese," she said. "It feels wrong." She turned her head toward me. "You violated 17 regulations. You destroyed Academy property. You compromised a pressure suit." She paused. "You gambled the lives of the entire squad." "I saved the squad," I said. She nodded slowly. "Yes, you did." She reached into the bedside drawer, pulled out a wrapped package, and tossed it onto my lap. "Requisition finally cleared," she said. I opened it. A brand new rigger's belt, high tensile polymer, reinforced buckle, rated for 5 tons, black, sleek, and absolutely not standard issue. The good stuff. "Try not to destroy this one," Leora said, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "And Reese?" "Yeah? When you return to duty, keep your boots unlaced." I blinked. "Sir? It appears to improve your aerodynamics." I grinned. "Yes, Lieutenant." 3 weeks later, the salvage bay was whole again. The smell of hot polymer filled the air. The deck gleamed. A fresh group of terrified first-year cadets stood around a massive composite slab, shaking like prey animals. I watched from the observation gantry, arms crossed, my new belt snug at my waist. Down on the floor stood the instructor, not Leora, Kieran Cash. He looked different. Same clean uniform, but his posture was looser. Feet planted wide, comfortable, ready. "The standard manual," Kieran said, his voice carrying across the bay, "is a guide." He stepped closer to the slab. "It is the map, not the territory." He kicked the slab. Thunk. "The map is perfect," he continued. "The territory is not." He turned to the class. "Try to look pretty, and you die. Try to be perfect, and you break." Kieran reached into his belt and pulled out a cheater bar, a long, ugly steel pipe. "Forget the geometry," he said, dropping into a deep, uneven, downright ugly crouch. He looked primitive. He looked effective. "Look at the metal," Kieran said. "Listen to what it wants." He jammed the bar under the slab and leaned back, using his weight just like I'd shown him. The slab rose effortlessly. "Class dismissed," Kieran said. Up on the gantry, my datapad chimed with a notification. I ignored it and looked down as Kieran showed a young cadet how to use a boot heel as a fulcrum. I smiled, just a little. "Not bad, kid," I murmured, "but use more hip next time."